Okay, hey everybody. I am booting up from a little bit of a crash here. I tried to import a NKI file, which is, what is that, a contact file? Contact sample instrument? Apparently Ableton can import contact instruments, but mine got hung up on the one I tried. Anyway, hi. Welcome. Today we are going to work on the sampler instrument, which for me for a long time was the instrument that I avoided because it was kind of intimidating, and there's the simpler, which I understood really well and does mostly the same thing, kind of the same thing, but sampler is like the big brother. You can do a lot more with sampler. And now that I've spent the morning learning about every single knob and control here, I'm really excited to make things with it. So I'm going to teach you what I've learned, and then we'll see about making some sounds. So, sampler. Let's start with a blank one. The main fundamental difference between sampler and simpler is that sampler is a multi-sample instrument, and simpler is a single sample instrument. What does that mean? Well, simpler, you can drop one sample in, and it'll play it. But sampler, you can put a whole bunch of different samples in and create much more complex instruments. So let me just show you a really an example of one that has been built out in detail, like a grand piano sample instrument. I see they use one sample. No, they use different samples for each key, though they're all different regions of the same file. So say you're sampling a piano. You don't want to take one piano note and transpose it to every single key like you would with the simpler. Here you would take one piano note, and if you play it 2 octaves higher, it'll transpose it twice as fast, twice as high. That's not really going to sound like a piano. Same with loud notes and soft notes. A loud note on a piano is not just louder than a soft note, but there's a whole complex number of kind of transformations. It's just a different sound when you hit the hammer softly on a real piano to when you hit it louder. There's more buzz, there's more noise. It's more bright if you really hit it loud versus if you hit it soft. So you can't just play a soft piano note loud and make it sound like a real piano. So if you want to sample a piano, you need to record a sample for each note of the piano, and ideally record also several different volume levels for that same note. So you have it quiet, you have it medium, you have it loud, and then you can load it all of those samples into a sampler and have it so that you play a certain key and it plays a certain sample, and you play a certain velocity and it plays a certain sample also. So that's the big fundamental architectural difference. If you want to have an instrument that uses different samples, multiple samples in it, either because divided up by note or by velocity, or just divided up by knob, you can have it with the selector knob, just like in a rack. You can use this to control which sample gets played at any one time. So there are a lot more cool things that you can do with this in addition to simpler that we're going to see as we go. But that's the really big one. So I thought for a first project, we should just refamiliarize ourselves with this sample selector. So this is just like the chain selector that you see on racks and we've looked at a number of times before, but I just want to review. So the thing I thought to try would be to make like a hi-hat instrument. Hi-hats are an instrument that we want to have a lot of variation in. A kick drum, we probably want to hear the same way each time, but hi-hats, to make them just more interesting to listen to and less fatiguing to listen to, we want to get some variation in a hi-hat pattern. So I'm going to make an instrument that lets us get kind of a variety of hi-hat sounds. So I'm just going to surf around in my samples. I search for hat. And I'm just going to look for some closed hi-hat sounds that are kind of related. So I'm avoiding really synthy ones. Cool, so here's just a variety of somewhat similar hi-hat sounds loaded in. Okay, so to see this area, I opened up zone. So toggle zone open and you can see this basically like chain selector for samples. Take a moment and do this. Grab some hi-hat samples, drop them into your zone area on an empty sampler. Okay, so the next thing that we can do is decide how we choose which of these gets played. I want to use the velocity selector so that we can create some variety by playing the notes different volumes. So check it out. You can control click and say distribute ranges equally. And then you get all of these different notes. I'm just playing different volumes and it's choosing different samples from my area here. If you want to blend these together a little bit, you could select them all and stretch them to overlap a bit and use the crossfade bar above. So now, like when I play at 72 velocity, I'm going to get some of this one and some of this one mixed together. global volume 12, maybe just because it's assuming that there may be some layering going on. If you have multiple samples playing at once, you're definitely going to want to turn them down so you don't peak. I don't really like this one much, so I'm going to take it out. Oh, I was like, why do these not sound like the samples I dropped in? And it's because I'm playing all different keys on the keyboard, and so it's transposing. Yes, there we go. Cool. So you might want to fine-tune which samples they are so they all feel more like a family. This is maybe a little too much variety for something that's going to sound like a consistent instrument. Maybe more overlapping. Here I want to turn down my volume because I have several overlapping. So that's the basic idea of a velocity selector. I'm going to show you quickly a key selector. I made this one before class where, well, let's see. I'll make a new one, we'll grab a sampler, and I'm going to load into it a bunch of single sample waveforms. There's a great library called AKWF that you can Google AKWF and download, and it just gives you single sample waveforms all tuned to C. So I can just drop a ton of those in here. And it's kind of like a synthesizer, like a wavetable synthesizer here. So right now they're all playing, but I could on key, if I want to make a different waveform play for each key of the keyboard, you can distribute ranges equally, and it'll make a different note for each of these. But what it does, now you see they're playing all the same pitch, whatever I play. And that's because it changes the root of each of these when it moves the note to a particular range. So let's talk about the relationship between the root and the note of the keyboard. When okay, here's a little trick. If you hit this arrow and play a note, it's going to bring up that sample in the sample editor, wherever it is. So that can help you find what it is that you're playing. So, right here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. We can say, control click and say we want large view. And I can see that this note, C3, is mapped to this sample. And it's selected C3 for the root. So if you're playing the key that matches the root here, then it's not going to transpose at all. Thank you. I've got my keyboard monitors. I mean, my monitors are in front of each other a little bit. Okay. So if you're playing a note that it's mapped to, if you're playing the note that is the root, then it's going to play the waveform, it's going to play the sample at its original speed. But if I make the root lower, and then I play that same C, I'm making the root lower. So I'm playing a fourth above this, and so it's taking the original sample and transposing it up a fourth. So basically you want to set the root to be whatever the sample sounds like. So if the sample sounds like a D, set root to D, and then all of your notes will play correctly. But what this did is take all of the roots and move them as well, which is not what I want because all of these samples are all tuned to C. So I puzzled over this for a moment, and I'm going to tell you how I solved it. You can select all of the samples and then change their roots here. So I want to reset all of their roots to C, because that's the note that each of these samples plays. So you can pull down. I'm pulling down, and it's moving all of the roots to the bottom. Actually, let me undo that, and we can watch up here. This is an annoying allocation of screen space. Anyway, okay. So I'm going to select all of these again, pull root down, and you can see all the little R's traveling down as I pull. And then they all get stuck at the bottom, and now they're all the same pitch. And then I can pull them all up, down. Now I can pull them all up to C. And now I have an instrument where I have a different waveform for each note that I play, and they're all tuned correctly. I'm kind of into that. Cool. So why don't you practice? You don't have to use these single sample waveforms, but why don't you practice by picking some sample from your sample library that's just a single note. I don't know, if you search synth, maybe you'll get a single note, or or bass in your samples. You'll find some bass lines, but also some single notes. So drop a single note in, and you can practice changing the root. Maybe make the root match. If it's got a letter in the sample, it's probably telling you the note. Okay, the last thing in this area that I want to show you is the selector. So this is also just like in racks that we've seen. I'm going to take a different idea for this instrument. I'm going to make all of the notes all of the samples play for all notes, but have them different ranges of the selector panel. So I can say distribute range equally. And now this is how I choose which sample. And I can map this to a MIDI controller. I can map this to a macro knob if I want to put this in a rack. That was Command G on the instrument to put it into an instrument rack. And then I can say map, click the thing, click the macro, and now I've got a knob here that lets me slide. So you can try something like that out, and we'll come back and now start talking about the panel here in a moment. Okay, so I'm going to jump ahead. I know this was review for lots of you. Let's take a look down here. Okay, let's take a look down here. So in our sample panel, I want to get a better. Okay, let's make a simple sampler with only one sample in it for the moment, so that we can focus on one thing. Okay, so I've got this single sample in here now, and let's talk about the different parts of this first panel, the sample panel. So we can reverse the sample, and it'll play backwards. Snap on and off means that whenever we select a start or stop point, it's going to snap to a zero crossing. So we can't actually select anywhere we want. It's only going to let us select a zero crossing, and a zero crossing is a place where there will be no pop if we start or stop. So you'll get cleaner. If you notice that you have pops in what you're doing, turn on snap. You've got root, which we talked about. Detune just lets you tune up or down a quarter tone. Scale is going to change the pitch of the note more based on whether you play high or low. I'm not sure when you would need that. What does this say? Okay, you could set it to 0 and it won't change your pitch samples of your samples at all. Aha, now every note that I play is played at the root. And if I set it to 100, it will properly transpose per note. And I can go more or less if I want to. We have volume and pan. And now we have a start and a stop point for the sample. So in this sample, it doesn't quite matter what it is, but if you've got a sample that's like a little more complex, sampler. Then it might really matter where your start point is. Yeah. And then your endpoint also. So now let's talk about sustain. So in this normal mode, it starts at the beginning and plays to the end and then stops, no matter how long I hold down my key. But there are other modes. So now I'm holding down a note and I get a loop. So this is still the start point, but now I have this loop area that I can set that determines which part of the sound is looped when I hold the key down. I can go forwards and backwards, which means it'll play through here. It'll start here, play through here, and then play backwards and bounce back and forth. It's kind of cool. Let's do it on our synth here. So if I want to sustain this, and it's going to be the smoothest if I pick a point in the waveform and match that same point later. Now that's smooth. So I'm at the trough of the wave and I'm at the trough of the wave, so there's not going to be a pop. Playing back and forth now. And now there's also a release portion. So the release is what happens after you lift your key. When it's off, it does nothing. You get silence when you lift your key. But you could also say, when I lift my key, I want to play to the end. It needs a release time. So if you go to Filter Global, you can turn up your release time. So now I've got 5 seconds of time after I lift up the key that it will finish playing out the whole rest of the sound. That's very clean. There's also a way to do a loop of the decay. So, I mean the release. So you let go. I'm sustaining now I'm going to let go. And it'll play whatever of this loop. It'll loop this as many times as it takes to use up all of the time of the release time. So this is already much more control over what parts of a sample get played in the different portions of the note envelope, the amplitude envelope, than you have on the simpler. I'm gonna make it really dramatic. A really small loop is going to make a totally different note. There we go. Okay, so that's the release mode, and these controls are just basically the numbers of which sample of the sample, basically, that you're controlling visually up here. So these we've already covered. Crossfade is going to give you some overlap in the loops. And you can also crossfade the release portion. You can also detune the different portions of the note envelope. So we could say that our sustain is a little, maybe is on pitch, and then our decay is detuned. I mean, our release is detuned. Letting go now. Cool, and last we have over here some controls just for quality. We can use better, so normal is the default, but higher settings will get you cleaner results, but they'll use more CPU, so that's a trade-off you can work with. RAM is going to load the sample into your active memory from the disk. So it won't have to read from the disk anymore to play the sound, which may get you some performance benefits, but especially with really, really long samples. But also loading things into RAM uses up your RAM that you may need for other things. So that's just another kind of quality trade-off. And last, this is just where we are visualizing. This is just for the display, whether we're seeing the right channel, left channel, mono, or both channels, stereo. Okay, I'm going to give you a minute to pull your own sample, play with the different sustain mode and release mode, and remember that in order to get release mode to work, you have to go to the Filter Global panel and give yourself some release time. And we'll loop back in a minute. You can also think about the sample start, loop start, these controls as parameters of the instruments. You could map these to a knob, and I could do something like one of the parameters of my instrument. Notice that sampler does not have warp modes. So when I am looping this portion, it's going to play faster when I play a higher note. And so the loops are not going to be in sync. But it does mean that you get kind of rhythmic relationships based on the pitch relationships, like the Harry Partch Rhythmicon, one of the earliest drum machines. So I'm playing a perfect fifth here, which is a 3:2 ratio in pitch, and I'm going to get a 3:2 ratio in rhythm too. So a 3 beats in one of them to 2 beats in the other. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, let's keep going. There's a lot to get through. So we've just looked through the sample panel. Maddie, no, there's not. If you want to have samples that warp, you need to use the simpler. Okay, so let's move to the next panel. So this is the pitch and oscillator panel. So down here we have a pitch envelope. This gives us a shape to the pitch. So you need to turn up a mount, and now this shape is 12 semitones tall. And so I drop an octave from here to here, or go up. This is how you could make a riser. That's pretty fun. Or you could just have a real subtle this is kind of like the laser sound. Pew pew pew. This is also kind of like how drums work. So if you're trying to make a drum sample, you can do a fast pitch envelope like this to model the striking of the drum head. Okay, so that's the pitch envelope. There's more controls here. I'm going to say no envelope, but turn up a mount and see what spread does. I haven't played with this yet. Okay, 2 detuned voices are generated per note when you have spread on. Here's where you can transpose, you can set it to glide. Cool, so that's the pitch part. Let's look at the oscillator effect. So this is really like the operator. So remember, operator is uses FM synthesis, where different oscillators modulate other oscillators, and they modulate the other oscillator's frequency. So it's like if you had an LFO on a note, it would sound like this. Whoa, whoa, whoa. But if you do that really, really fast, you no longer hear the variation in pitch, but it rather becomes a distortion of the timbre that lets you get really complex, rich tones out of just 2 oscillators rather than like 30 oscillators stacked into each other, which is additive synthesis. So this is frequency modulation, and it works a whole lot like the operator. So remember, the operator, you first have to tune, you decide how the oscillator is tuned to the other oscillator. So we're thinking of this as the carrier, and this is the modulating wave. And right now the modulating wave is tuned in a ratio of 1. So it's tuned to the same pitch. And it's a waveform that you can choose from this list. So I can say I want a square wave. The higher the number, just the more fine, the more overtones it has. And then you turn up volume. So this is just like on the operator. Your coarse and your fine tune and your level. You can also set it to fixed and it'll be a specific frequency. Same thing here. You can set it to fixed and choose a specific frequency and multiply it. So these are all integers, meaning they are going to be the harmonics of the note. And so you get a change of timbre, but not really of pitch. There's still a strong chord to the pitch. But if you turn up fine tune, you're going to get n-harmonic relationships. And you get wilder sounds this way. Cool. So over here is an envelope that basically controls this volume control. So I can say I want an attack of like half a second, a decay of a second, a release of 30 seconds. I don't know. That's excessive. So now I have, it's as if I go like that. This shape is turning up the volume knob and then pulling it down. And you could loop this. So right now it's one shape per note, but you can make it kind of like an LFO and say every 16th note I want to turn up this volume on my modulator every 16th note. You also have AM synthesis, which modulates the amplitude rather than the frequency, and you just get different results. So as you're designing an instrument, always be thinking about how all of these controls can be macro knobs on your instrument rack or mapped to your MIDI control. So this, it's not always just about finding one value that you like, but seeing which values have expressive capabilities. So I'm liking how this changes things, and so I can map this to my knob here, and it becomes one of my expressive controls on my instrument. Okay, so that's my modulating oscillator and my pitch envelope. I'm gonna take this off actually, but leave my glide on. Cool, next panel, filter. So we've got a filter, we've seen these a million times now. Very expressive to take your frequency knob and map it to a macro. Here's one thing, you have a couple of options for circuit. So these each model like analog filters. And so when you turn them on, you get kind of analog drive controls. You can boost. Just like on your operator, we had this filter shaper, which lets you drive the gain and shape the sound with kind of clipping, with different kinds of clipping. Same deal here. We can boost the volume, turn on the shaper, and choose how we want it to clip things that are too loud, and turn this up. So this gives you that nice kind of saturation feeling from the filter that makes it feel more analog, more warm, more real. Filter envelope lets you map a shape to your filter frequency. You need to turn up a mount to get it to take effect. Right now it's going like pew, pew, because it's starting high and going down. If you do an attack like this, it's as if you're going wow, wow. Which always makes me think of this like brass synth sounds, is when you have a filter opening up like this. Wow. So this is just all normal ADSR stuff. You can loop this as well. So this kind of becomes like an LFO. We could say every quarter note, I want to go, I want to open the filter and close it. There we go. Over here we have our global controls. So this is just our amplitude envelope. So we can make a note with a long fade in like this. Or a really sharp attack. This is for kind of plucky sounds with a real fast attack like this and a low sustained volume and a fast decay. Okay, let's keep going. Modulation. So This is familiar to you if you've used any of the synths, been to any of our synth classes. We have one more envelope, which we can map to anything. So A and B here, let us choose which thing we want to map. We might do like filter morph. So check this out. If you set your filter to this guy, you have this morphing control, which actually lets you morph between all of the different filters. So let's go to modulation. This envelope, filter morph, you have to turn up how much it's going to affect the value. And then you can make a shape. So I want to slowly, over 5 seconds, morph through all the filters. So we went through all the filters, and then we slid back through all the filters, and now we're here stuck on one filter setting. That's pretty cool. Oh, I'm into that. You also have LFOs. So the first LFO has easy mapping to volume, pan, pitch, filter, just like your simpler did. The simpler LFO, same way. You've got volume, pan, pitch, filter. So here we could say volume, and it'll fade in and out. Filter, it'll open and close the filter. Pan, it'll pan left and right. Pitch, it'll add some wobble. I'm going to add just a little bit to give it that kind of lo-fi sound. And then you have two more LFOs that can do also map to any two parameters. Usual LFO stuff, we've got rate in hertz and relative to the clock, the meter. There's an attack, so the LFO doesn't kick in right away if you don't want it to. One thing that hasn't come up before that I want to cover is the stereo options. So stereo, left and right ears. This LFO, let's try to make it something that's really obvious. Like filter frequency. So in this first mode, phase, the left ear and the right ear are going to have the same LFO. But if you switch into spin mode, then you have the ability of speeding up the left, or the right ear in this case, speeding one of them up so they don't go in unison. Oh, and I need to turn up Filter Freak to get anything to happen. Yes. Now you can see that they're oscillating at different times, at different rates. Now I'm back in unison, and they're oscillating together. So this is a pretty cool thing. And then you have just one more modulation. So you can modulate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different parameters in 4 different shapes. 3 of them LFOs, 1 an envelope. But the envelope can also be an LFO if you set it to one of these looping modes. Okay, last I'm going to tell you about the MIDI panel, and then we're going to call it a day. So the MIDI panel is how you decide which parameters on your keyboard or MIDI instrument get mapped in what ways. So like velocity, you can say, when I play different volumes of notes, I want it to affect the rate of my LFO. So I have it faster if I play louder or slower if I play softer. You can map velocity to 2 different destinations like this and change the amounts. And you have these other things that are properties of your keyboard as well. Aftertouch is pressure on the key after you've played the note. It's only available on some kinds of keyboards. Mod wheel is the main wheel that's not your pitch bend wheel. So you can make the mod wheel be for something like one of your LFO rates. Loop start, tell us what that is. So modulation 1 rate, this is my pitch. So let's see, if I do mod wheel, turn this up, and I play a note. I gotta turn off this spinning filter LFO. So now my mod wheel controls how fast that pitch LFO is. It's pretty subtle in this case. But yeah, you have a pedal. If you have a pedal on your keyboard and you can set it to something and something else. Pitch bend is the other wheel. It doesn't have to just do pitch bend. It can also do other things, and you can decide how much the natural bend is. So if you set it to 0, then you can set these to anything else, and it won't bend. It'll just do those things. Oh, loop start. The loop start time. Yes. So I feel like I need a different sample. So like here's my bird sample. Well, I don't know, something that's really unique throughout, like some speech. Voices.
Era solo un bambino, ma quel mondo lo aveva conquistato. Dapprima come studente, poi era solo un bambino.
So I could map my start time to my mod wheel, loop start.
Dapprima come studente, poi come docente di
and make a small
Era solo un bambino, ma
loop
quel
area. Let's see.
Ma quel mondo lo va conquistato. Dapprima come
Let's see if it shows up in the sample thing here. So I'm
ma quel mondo lo aveva conquistato.
Yeah, so I'm turning my mod wheel now, which is controlling the loop start place. And I'm get to move around inside the sample while I hold the key down. So that is an overview of your sampler. Sky's the limit because you can drop any kind of sample in here. We could make a whole instrument just out of the speech or anything else that you think of and work with it like a synth with the oscillator, pitch envelope, filters, modulation, all the different kinds of modulation, and then map parameters to your playing so that you can create expressive controls and make them musical relative to your instrument.
conquistato. Dapprima come studente, poi come docente di pittura e di ceramica.
It does sound like it's gonna rain.
Quel mondo lo aveva conquistato, ma quel mondo lo aveva conquistato.
There we go. Oh yeah, I should have said at the very beginning, make a sample, make a resample track.
Ma quel mondo lo aveva conquistato.
Like I've got this one here, it's set to resampling, I can arm it, and anytime you hear a cool sound,
ma quel mondo lo aveva conquistato. Ma quel mondo lo aveva conquistato. Dapprima come studente, poi come docente di pittura e di ceramica.
be recording.
Ma come studente, come docente di pittura.
And then you'll build yourself a library of interesting sounds.
Ma quel mondo lo aveva conquistato. Ma quel mondo lo aveva conquistato.
And then give it a name, and when you are done, you can go to your user library. I've made myself a folder called resamples. Did that today, haven't used it yet. And then you can drag in resamples for use later. Then when you sit down to start a song, you can work with your own material that you have generated in the past, rather than working with presets and stock stuff. So thanks everybody, thanks for coming. This was fun. I'm really glad that now I am no longer intimidated by the sampler, and I hope you also no longer feel intimidated by the sampler. If you haven't followed this channel, go ahead and hit the heart button above to see when I come on. There's material on the info panel. On Twitch, it's maybe different now for some of you, where you have to hit a button to see all the information about the class. But yeah, there's a lot of info there. You can sign up for an email list. I do this for donation, so if you want to help keep the ball rolling, you can click on the donation link on the info panel there, and send me a couple bucks on PayPal. I'd appreciate it. And I'm going to be going Tuesdays and Thursdays for a while, and not Saturdays. I'm kind of shifting into summer gear here. So yeah, thanks everybody for coming. I will see you Tuesday. Oh yeah, there's a Discord channel too if people want to hang out, talk about learning Ableton. Yeah. Thanks. Great to see all of you, my friends. I want to hear what you make with this. If you make some cool sounds. Oh, one more tip. Once you make something, save it. So here's this I liked this thing that I made. So I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to hit the floppy disk button here and then give it a name, evolving. I put my name up front, evolving pads. All right, that's the end. Thanks everybody. Gabriella, not quite sure. I had a lot of fun doing some jazz harmony last Tuesday, and so I've been daydreaming about figuring out how to easily write just like a basic swing eighth note solo line over chords in the MIDI editor. So I may continue with that or do something else. Not sure yet. But yeah, I'll be doing Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'm going to go kind of week by week. We'll see how much the summer torpor sucks me in. Okay, thanks everybody. See y'all later.